Right, testing 1, 2, 3. 1 second here. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. 1 second here. Alright, cool, sound is working. I did a whole video and sound wasn't working, so luckily it was kind of a short video and we'll be able to go over that again fairly quickly. So let's jump right in and get this started. Last time we looked at some flow control or conditional statements, and what else did we do? Functions. So we're going to take a step back and a step forward at the same time. We're going to be working with a different data type today. It's a different kind of variable, and generically people usually refer them as lists or arrays. Those are actually very specific names which may or may not actually represent what we're talking about. But you may notice I'll use those interchangeably, but I'll go over and note the actual name of things. So one thing I didn't go over in my first video is comments. In Python you use the pound sign, so you use 2 pound signs to create a comment. So I'm going to just type the name of what I'm using here. So I'm going to create what's called a tuple. A tuple is a kind of, it's a variable that holds multiple pieces of information. Actually, and technically it stores a list, actually technically it stores the first item of a list and then it knows what comes after that. But a tuple is basically to hold multiple things in one. So if you think of one variable, just like a single variable, as a phone number, for example, you could think of a tuple as a phone book. So you can hold multiple pieces of information inside the same thing, and you can actually iterate through those and see everything inside of it. One thing about a tuple is that you can't really change it after you've created it, and you cannot resize a tuple. So let me show you what I mean. To create a tuple, you just type in the name of it. So if I'm going to do something called fruits, and then you put these parentheses, and everything that you put in there will be will be an item in the tuple. You just have to separate them by commas. So if I'm going to create a tuple of fruits, I'm going to say apple, I'm going to say banana, and orange, and straw. We'll leave it at that. Okay, so you notice every item, these are 3 strings inside one tuple called fruits. The first item, second item, and third item are all separated by commas, and they're all each, because they're strings, they're in quotation marks. So let me show you what happens when I go ahead and run this. I can print my tuple. Whoops, print my tuple called fruits. And there it is. Now, to demonstrate the point I was making earlier, don't worry about the syntax here right now. I'll explain it. But if I go to my fruits, and I take position 0, and I try to change that, so instead of apple, I want that to be, let's say, strawberry, or say grapes. It tells me there's an error. I can't do that. Tuple object does not support item assignments. This is what I was talking about earlier. You can't change the items, or you can't assign items after they've already been defined in the tuple. Obviously, you can go back to your script and change that if you want, so that's fine. So you notice here in the syntax I was just going over used was the name of the tuple, brackets, a number inside, and then an assignment. What that means is fruits holds a list of indices or indexes. I don't know how you actually say that. Each one of these has an index beginning with 0. So you count from 0 all the way up to however many items you have inside that tuple. For example, you have apple being 0, banana being 1, and orange being 2. It's important to remember all lists, tuples, dictionaries, etc., they all start with 0, not 1. So if you want to refer to the first item, it's actually item 0. So it's important to remember because you may run into problems. So what I did here is I referred to my tuple of fruits, the first item being apple, and I tried to change it to grapes. Obviously that did not work. So there is a workaround here. Not a workaround, but an alternative, rather, which is called a list. So a list, if I wanted to make a list of vegetables, let me do something else, list of cars. To declare that, instead of using parentheses, you're going to put it inside square braces or square brackets. So the way you define stuff inside of it is just the same as in this case I'm going to make a list of strings, which are cars, so Toyota, Honda, Ford. That's good. So when I go to print this, There it is. Oops. What the heck? That was weird. Alright. So there we printed our list. In this case I can change my items. A list does allow you to actually change items inside of it, and you can make it longer and bigger. But I'll get into that in a little second. So let's go over first changing an item. So if I try the same syntax I did before, which was cars, I want to change the first item to something else. In this case I'll change it to Chevy. No error, it's fine. So when I print my cars now, the first item is now Chevy, then I have Honda, and then I have Ford. So this list can store anything you can think of, stats. You can make a list that holds other kinds of objects inside of it, and we'll get into that later. But you can store a lot of different things inside of a list, and it's really, really helpful. And the last kind I want to show you is what's called a dictionary. A dictionary is made up of 2 values per entry. I don't know if that makes any sense. You have a key and a value, sorry. So the key is basically how you refer to the item, and the value is actually what it means. So in a dictionary you would think of it as the word and its definition. The way you declare that is I'm going to use words. Actually I'm going to use ages. And then the way you do that is with the curly brackets or braces. I don't know what they're called. It's little squiggly ones. And then we declare this a little bit differently. The key value, let's say I want to use a string, let's say for Ray, and then we put a colon is going to separate the key from the value. So in this case, Ray's age, we'll put I forget, I think I'm 24. Joe is 25, and I'm just picking up names here. Bill is 34. Alright, so when I go to print this, it's going to look fairly similar to this up here. Print ages, there it is. So now if I want to print an item, you'll notice if I go to print ages 0, that doesn't work. You have to use the key value. So if I want to print ages, I would say Ray, and that's going to give me the age that is stored as the value to this key, right? So it's might be a little bit tricky to understand if you've never encountered this before, but just think of it exactly like you would a dictionary. So if I make a dictionary called words, and I would use, for example, the word apple again, and its definition would be a red or green fruit that tastes yummy. And then I would make a second one called banana, and colon, and the definition would be phallic shaped fruit. There you go. And then I close that, and then I run it. So now when I go and I want to find what is the definition for words, what is the definition for banana or apple? And so I look for the word, and there's a definition. So there's a lot of uses actually for dictionaries. Each one has their own. There's a scenario in which you want to use it. Generally, a list will do fine, because you'll notice, tuple. Why would you even use a tuple if you can't change the values? Well, tuples tend to be faster. It's not a big deal in a program like this because it's kind of small. You're not really going to encounter any performance issues, but on bigger programs you might have to use a tuple. That's the only reason that you choose a tuple, I think. Just performance. Or if you just don't want to be able to change stuff for whatever reason, I guess. So generally I stick to a list. A list is pretty flexible, and I'm going to show you a few ways in that you can use a list. First thing I want to do is go back to something from the previous video, which is a for loop. If you remember, a loop just goes through and iterates through basically a range of numbers. In this case, you can iterate through a list. So we have here a for loop, which you declare with which you start with the for word, and then next you say a variable. So for car, and this variable is just going to be a temporary value that's going to be used to reference the current place you are in your loop. And I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense, so let me run it first and I'll explain how it's working. So for car in cars, so I'm going to look for every car inside of my list called cars. and I'm going to print out what car that is. So if I run that, you see it went through and printed the first one, second one, third one, and it went in a loop. The way this works is, basically this car works as an index. So what you're going to have is car is actually equal to, it's going to start out at 0, which would be Toyota, and then every time it runs through it's going to add 1. So it's going to become car, it's going to equal 2, or sorry, 1, and then that becomes Honda, and it's going to do the same thing over and over. So to better illustrate this, I could use for number, instead of a list, I can just use what's called a range, and then I think we used this in the last video. So if I don't count through 1 through 11, I would say 1 comma 11, and that's actually going to count, if you remember, from 1 to 10, because it doesn't include the second number. It only goes up to that number. And then I'm going to print number, so it's going to count from 1 to 10. So a for loop, what it does is it iterates through these things, and it's very helpful to be able to use this with a list, because you can count all the items inside of it, or you can do something for every item in the list. So let's say you have your inventory, and you wanted to print stats for that inventory, like every item in your inventory, so you go through there and print every single stat assigned there. So that's pretty much it for the for loop part of it. It's fairly simple. In Python it's really readable, because you just say for number in range, or for number in numbers, or whatever your variable is called. Whereas in another language, just to show you, don't get too confused here, but just to show you what it would look like, you would say for, you'd have to declare the number, actually you'd have to declare the type, so int number equals 0, so that's your starting point, like I had shown you in the drawing, where it started at 0. Then you would have to tell it for what the range is going to run through. So basically you would say number, where you'd say number is less than 11, and then it's going to add 1 every time, so number plus plus. And then you would say what happens inside of it. This in Python is a lot easier, just for number in range, and then that's it. Like a lot of things in Python, it hides certain things from you that make it easier to use, but there's a little bit of functionality issue there. It's just a matter of taste. So it's fairly simple for loops. So let's go back to the list. So we have this list. We actually want to make it, we want to extend this list. Now, technically, what happens at how should I explain this? A list actually cannot be made longer or shorter. You can't change the size of a list. So if there's 3 entries, you can't make it 4 entries technically. But what Python does is it, behind the scenes, when you make or try to add a new item to a list, what it does is it copies that list to a list that is 1 size bigger, and then it puts it back into the original list. So you don't ever see this stuff happening, you just see the end result, that is your list becoming 1 size bigger. So for example, if I wanted to add, well, first let me run this. Let's say I wanted to add another brand to cars. So you would use this function called append, and then you would say, let's say I want to add Chevy to it, and then I print cars. Now it's Toyota, Honda, Ford, Chevy. Now this little dot here is not something we've covered yet. It's called a dot operator. What it's doing basically though is that cars is being a list. A list is just a class which has a certain amount of parameters to it. In this case, one of the things it does is it has a function inside of it. You don't see that in here. It's actually hidden. Not hidden, but it's in part of the language itself. It has a function in it called append that takes a word, and then basically it does some magic behind the scenes, and it does the stuff I described, basically, where it copies it to a new list and does all this stuff. So you don't really at this point need to worry about what exactly this is. Just know that this is how you use it. If you have any questions about it, you can always go to the documentation, which is docs.python.org, and here it tells you exactly what you need to use that particular function. And don't worry too much about what goes on in the back end. You'll figure that out later on as you learn the language. Alrighty, so you can append, but let's say I wanted to add, because you notice append added it at the very end of my list. Let's say I wanted to have something between Honda and Ford. Well, you can do that. You can do cars dot insert. Insert actually takes two parameters. The first one being the position you want it to have. So I want it to be the third position, which, if you remember, starts from counting from 0. So it'd be 0, 1, 2. It would be position 2. That's my third one. And then the item I want to put in there would be, I don't know, Kia. Alright, so then I print cars, and there you go. I can also remove certain items. I can just do cars.remove Kia, and then I print cars. Kia's gone. One thing to remember about remove is, let me just set this up again. Let me put cars.append Honda. So now I'm going to have two Hondas in here. So it's Toyota, Honda, Ford, Chevy, Honda. If I use remove, it's only going to remove the first time it finds it. So it's not going to remove both of them. So if I do cars.remove Honda, it's going to remove this one here at position 1, but it's going to leave the one there at the very end. So it remove the second one here, or the first position, and then it left that one there. And the other thing, let's see, there was another one. Well, that's basically it for a list. Lists are very, very helpful, so you can iterate through them. You can store multiple things in there. You can expand them. It's awesome. Python makes it very easy. You don't have to import any libraries or anything. You just use these functions and magic happens, basically. So that's basically it for lists. You have the list, tuples, and you have the dictionaries. There's definitely more types out there, but these are the main ones, and these are the good ones to get started with as a beginner. So as usual, if you have any questions, just feel free to leave a comment, and hopefully we'll get these videos up on YouTube as well, so you can just subscribe to the channel or drop any questions on the channel itself.